It's great to welcome to the program once again Marc Elias, a voting rights attorney and the founder of Democracy Docket, which is the leading digital news platform dedicated to information, analysis, and opinion, specifically about voting rights and elections in the courts. Marc, we could start in any number of places, but because I told my audience that I would start here, I want to start with this news of the DOJ and FBI investigating former FBI Director James Comey, former CIA Director John Brennan. For years, we heard from Donald Trump, Joe Biden is weaponizing investigative agencies. And what he really meant was, if I were in Biden's shoes, that's what I would be doing. And in fact, it's what he is doing. How big of a deal is this really if you're James Comey or Brennan right now?
So I think we need to unpack this a little bit. The first is if you're James Comey or Brennan, it's certainly not welcome news. It's not like what you are hoping for, but this is likely not going to amount to very much. I mean, let's start with the fact that the facts at issue, whatever comes of them one way or the other, took place, 8 years ago or more. The statute of limitations is 5 years, so nothing that happened prior to, say, 2020, 5 years ago, would be prosecutable anyway. That's before you get to the fact that they almost certainly did nothing wrong, and that is also, remember, Donald Trump actually did this playbook in his first term. People forget this, but Donald Trump accused Barack Obama of wiretapping him, accused Hillary Clinton of election interference in 2016, and importantly, accused the FBI of election interference. And Bill Barr appointed John Durham, a special counsel, to look into the allegations specifically with respect to the FBI, which then looked at the Clinton campaign, also the other intelligence agencies. There were cases that John Durham brought. Those led to acquittals. And so it is hard to see, not only is it old, not only is it political, but it is also like this ground. Donald Trump has played this card once before, and I don't see this going anywhere.
We then move into, and then we're going to weave. I'm doing the weave right now. We're then going to weave all of these things together. So we've got that maybe on a personal level, based on the statute of limitations, may not end up becoming a big thing for Brennan or Comey. Fine. We then have CBS and Paramount, which have been sued by Donald Trump. They do appear to be moderating their journalism, their sort of eagerness to reach lawsuit settlements that some describe as frivolous, although I know that lawyers take issue sometimes with the term frivolous. So I'm using
it's frivolous.
It's frivolous. Okay, fine. So I'm using it colloquially. You're not, but it's frivolous. What I'm seeing is it's working in the sense that these media institutions do seem like they would rather stay on Trump's better side. I don't know if it's the good side, but the better side. Self-censorship, merger interests are sometimes sort of lurking below the surface. It seems like it's working exactly as Trump would want it to work.
Yeah, look, I've been very outspoken about this. I mean, the lawsuit against CBS was frivolous. I mean, the argument was that it constituted election interference because CBS News edited a portion of video with Kamala Harris. Well, Guess what? Like, news outlets regularly edit video for time. They edit it for clarity. If they didn't edit videos, Donald Trump would look even more incoherent than he often looks, because his news outlets edit his videos to try to get to the point. So that case is frivolous. The ABC News one, which it seems to have largely been modeled after, was not, I would not say frivolous, I'd say it was meritless. So maybe a degree, there was a little more there. There was a traditional defamation claim. But just to clarify that for your audience. But absolutely, look, the legacy media is capitulating to Donald Trump. Like, it is, I don't understand why people would trust lawyers who would sell out their principles in order to cut a deal with Donald Trump. And I don't understand why people would get their news from a news outlet that is willing to sell out its principles to cut a deal with Donald Trump. And people can give me all of the ancillary business reasons why this makes sense. They needed a merger to go through. The cost of litigation was high. They
Yeah.
didn't want to go through discovery. Like, they can give me all of those reasons, just as the law firm lawyers can, right? The law firm lawyers can say, well, they don't want to lose clients, and this would be a distraction. But like, the end of the day, the outcome is the outcome, which is you have large institutions, large media corporations that are bowing down to Donald Trump, and they are willing to make changes to the way in which they do business. In the case of CBS News, the releasing of transcripts, there's also been some reporting that they may have agreed to public service announcements, which is kind of like the law firm giving free legal services. And I just ask, I'd ask everyone watching this, why would you trust why would you trust a news outlet that cuts this kinds of deal and makes these kinds of compromises to give you the accurate and unvarnished truth and information analysis about what Donald Trump is doing to democracy? Why would you trust them if they're making these deals? I mean, this is why, David, I'm on your show. This is why we were talking before we went on. I watch your videos regularly because I'm going to get your perspective, but I know this: your perspective is not colored by whether or not you want to be invited to all the right parties at Donald Trump's club, nor is it going to be colored because you are trying to do some ancillary business deal that you're trying to suck up to the Trump administration for.
Right. When it comes to some of the cases that your law firm is involved in, well, let me enter this subject a different way. I recently did a Substack Live with Aaron Parnas, who is a lawyer, and we were talking about, is anything working right now in terms of a robust opposition? And he said, for all of the headlines about Trump ignoring court orders, Aaron's perspective is, actually, we are really doing quite well in the courts. And like, even if you look at Kilmar Abrego Garcia, where initially they didn't turn the plane around, they did bring him back to the United States ultimately. And so Aaron's argument was, even though it doesn't get the headlines that maybe it should or shouldn't, but it doesn't get headlines, the work that your law firm and others are doing, we actually are doing pretty well when we take a lot of what the Trump administration does to court. What do you make of that analysis?
Yeah, I think that is largely correct, with a caveat. So I don't think there's any question that right now the courts are the strongest bulwark against authoritarianism. And
Okay.
that if you look at the record of challenges to the attacks that Donald Trump has lodged against democracy now for the better part of 10 years, the courts have done pretty well for themselves. I mean, the post-election 2020, he wound up pardoning a bunch of people, but that wasn't because the courts failed to hold them accountable. And as Aaron is mentioning in the Trump 2.0, the win-loss ratio for the Department of Justice is at an all-time low, right? The Department of Justice is losing an awful lot of these cases around the country. So I think that is all true. I think the place where I give the measure of caution is that our system is not really set up to have the courts be the bulwark
Right.
of democracy. And so, there's a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court. I lodge a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court, and that is all true. But what I'd say is that even if you had the best Supreme Court, even if you had all the courts operating exactly as you and I might like them, they are still not, I sometimes tell folks who say, Mark, you're saving democracy. I say, no, I am buying time for democracy. I am buying time for it to be saved, if it is going to be saved, through the political processes that are set up to protect democracy. And that starts with, by the way, Democrats taking control of Congress in 2026, because it is ultimately Congress has more of power than the courts do, frankly, to rein in the executive branch. When people talk about three co-equal branches of government, the founders really anticipated the legislative branch would be the most powerful, not the judiciary or the executive branch. So that is my only qualification, is that that eventually, if we do not get other institutions, whether it's the institutional media, whether it's the Congress, whether it's the legal establishment, the courts are not going to be able to hold this back.
The analogy or metaphor that comes to mind would sort of be if you're on a boat with a huge hole in it, the courts may be able to sort of like take buckets of water
Right.
and throw them overboard. But at a certain point, unless you plug the leak, the ship's going to sink. Is that a fair sort of
That's
metaphor?
100% right.
So let's talk now about 2026. I've started to get emails from people basically saying, do you think there will be free and fair elections in the 2026 midterms? And every time this comes up, it's sort of like, I guess maybe tell me specifically what you're concerned about. You know, it's such a broad question. Are we talking about, I mean, listen, because of gerrymandering, to get 50% of the House seats, Democrats need around 54% of the vote based on the reports I've seen. So, like, is that free and fair? Or are you talking about voting machine manipulation or the closing of polling? There's so many fronts on this. So I'll just leave it broad. What are we staring down, so to speak, for 2026 right now?
Yeah. So first of all, to address one step back, which you didn't ask, I want to assure people we will have elections in 2026.
Yes.
Right? They're not going to cancel the election. People who are spreading conspiracy theories that there'll be no elections, I tell people to disregard those.
Yep.
So we're going to have elections. I think the right question is the one that you asked, which is, will they be free and fair? Which is, of course, a continuum, right? Like there is no hard cutoff where something goes from being free and fair to not free and fair. There are gradations of elections. And so, what people, I think, need to think about is the election process in several phases. The first is, what are the rules of the election? For example, like how are districts drawn? Because as you point out, you can have all of the voting access you want. You could have, voting equipment that you love, 50 days of early voting, vote by mail, like you could have everything else. But if you have extreme enough gerrymandering,
Right.
then none of that will matter, right? So the rules, the first thing I always tell folks is that the rules of voting matter enormously. Gerrymandering is the most obvious one that people see. But I've increasingly been writing about this at Democracy Docket and warning people that we cannot excuse the other rules changes or the other manipulation rules that we see Republicans doing that are less obvious. So this is an example that I used recently in a piece I wrote. In 2013, the Republican legislature in North Carolina was found to have targeted black voters in a voter suppression law with near surgical precision. What the legislature did is they went through all of the potential voting changes they could make, and they asked the staff to score them by how much it would negatively impact black voter turnout versus white voter turnout. And then they chose the provisions that would most negatively impact black voters without impacting white voters. Okay. That was 2013. The person who was the speaker, was the state Senate president in North Carolina at the time, was Tom Tillis. The person who had just been the most recent presidential nominee for the Republican Party was Mitt Romney. Okay, so that was the party of Tillis and Romney. If they were doing that with the technology as it existed in 2013, you can imagine what they are doing today as they are scoring what voting changes they make, where they open polls, where they close polls, where
Right.
they, make changes in voter registration alike. And so the pernicious impact of a lot of the laws that you see Republicans enact are not on their face as obvious as redistricting maps are, but that's because we can now use software to know what the effects will be of those redistricting maps. But just looking at the visual of the maps, you wouldn't be able to tell either. And so I feel like sometimes with the voting discussion I have with people, it's like they're looking at the visuals, they're not understanding what's underneath them. So I think that is of concern. And then the final piece of it is the whole certification of elections. We were very, very focused on this in the run up to 2024. In states like Georgia. Well, the only thing that changed is that Donald Trump won in 2024. It's not like the threat went away, and it's not like
Right.
so where I would tell people to be worried are in the following things. Number one, that the Republican voter suppression war machine is cranking away. The RNC and the Department of Justice, in tandem with them, are suing to make it harder for you to vote. If you are watching this video, almost certainly you are among the audiences being targeted with new voting restrictions and changes that you may not even notice, but will have an impact on who votes, who can vote, and whose vote counts. And then finally, I continue to be very worried about what a post-election certification process looks like. We saw what they did in 2020, obviously, and in 2024, frankly, what they did in North Carolina with the state Supreme Court election, where they litigated for 6 months to try to overturn the results of that election.
Obviously, having lawyers fighting is important. For my audience, what can the individual do on this front?
Yeah. So look, I gave a talk, which is somewhere on the internet, a couple of years ago, and I was asked the question essentially, why do you win so often in court? And what I said is that one of the reasons why we win so many voting cases is because the judges live in the communities that are being targeted, and they have neighbors. They go to soccer games. And they don't want to live in a community in which the community is concerned that their votes are not going to count, right? It's an abstraction to say someone else's vote maybe doesn't count, but the communities judges live in matter a lot. Culture, I think it was Steve Bannon said, or Breitbart, who said that, politics is downstream of culture. Well, that is true in the macro sense of politics. It's also true in things like voting. So the most important thing people can do is to share their views about the importance of voting and the importance in their communities to having free and fair elections. That will help win court cases. That will also help election deniers not do their work, right? Because like fundamentally for voter suppression to work, you need the collaboration and the coordination of a lot of people at the local level. So the more visible people are at the hyper local level in their towns, their counties, their election offices, the better, because like that is ultimately more so than anything the Supreme Court's going to do, the thing that is going to make the biggest difference.
We've been speaking with Marc Elias, founder of Democracy Docket. Marc, will of course have you back as we get closer to the 2026 election to dig in more detail to exactly how this is all going. Always appreciate your time and your insights.
Same here. And by the way, like I said, I'm a big fan of your show. I hope everyone watches it.
Thank
And
you.
your book was a great read. So I hope people go out and buy that.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.